Now, I've been on vacation enjoying a few weeks in Australia, and while I was there, I checked out a local arcade in Brisbane known as Netherworld. Now, like any good barcade, they will have a few what I would call must-have machines, and these would include games like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, NBA Jam, and of course Street Fighter 2. Now, this particular arcade had Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, which was the second in the series after the original World Warrior. Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition is an updated iteration of the World Warrior, which lets you play as the original 8 characters like before, but for the first time also introduces the 4 boss characters Sagat, M. Bison, Vega, and Balrog as playable characters. Champion Edition also revised some of the backgrounds, allowing 2 players to select the same character, but perhaps more importantly, it tweaked the gameplay code to address balancing issues that arose from the original World Warrior game. Now, with any trip to a modern arcade, it comes with nostalgia, and I remember the first time that I ever saw Street Fighter 2 in the arcades. It was 1993, and it was the original World Warrior version. However, it wouldn't be long before that cabinet was updated. Now, Capcom had a very clever system to update arcade cabinets. They used what was known as dynamo cabinets, which allowed for new games to be swapped in, and it only really required replacements to the game art, marquee, control panel, and side panel artwork. And of course, thanks to the JAMA standard, the game board or PCB could easily be swapped out as well. This saved time and money transporting cabinets in and out. But something interesting happened when I noticed this. On the surface, this cabinet appeared to be the Champion Edition update. However, something was off with it. The logo was different colored. The fighting mechanics were much different to regular Street Fighter 2 rules. For example, you could perform mid-air attacks, throw fireballs that locked onto your opponent like guided missiles. You could even switch characters mid-game like Shang Tsung in Mortal Kombat. And it was much faster than I remember Street Fighter 2 ever being at the time. And this was my first ever experience at seeing Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition in the arcades. However, this was a bootleg, and this would become the infamous Rainbow Edition hack of Champion Edition that added many features to the gameplay which were not present in the original. Many of these enhancements would be considered game-breaking. However, some of these changes made their way to subsequent releases of the Street Fighter 2 series in the arcades and home consoles. And in today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive at probably the most well-known ROM hack ever in the arcades, Street Fighter 2 Rainbow Edition. Street Fighter 2 Rainbow Edition gets its name from the multicolored Street Fighter 2 logo, which is unlike any of the official versions. And as mentioned, the changes brought over are over the top. Mid-air fireballs, spinning kicks that teleport you across the screen, character swaps, tons of projectiles on screen at once, and so much more. Playing a few rounds seems like the odds are against you, but you can be as cheap as you want back to the computer, and there is a method to the madness here. The pace of the game is so much more faster than the original World Warrior and the official Champion Edition versions, so much so that it's nearly impossible to go back. Going back to World Warrior feels like your feet are in quicksand. Once you get a taste for the speed of Rainbow Edition, you're hooked. But how does a ROM-hacked version of one of the most popular arcade fighting games of all time make its way to so many arcades, bars, convenience stores and laundromats around the world? Well, it's all thanks to Capcom's arcade hardware that ran Street Fighter 2, the Capcom Play System, or CPS-1. Releasing in 1998, it was Capcom's very first modular design where the arcade hardware could be reused to play many games. It was a new standard to build their games on, and there were over 30 titles released on CPS-1 hardware. It featured a group of interconnected PCBs. The A board was the base board that contained the CPU, the memory chips, and the sound chips. The B board contained the game ROMs either as mask ROMs or burnt EPROMs. At a very high level, and in some scenarios, this meant that you could swap in a different B board onto an existing A board and have an entirely new game in your arcade cabinet. Or you could even just replace game ROMs with different CPS-1 game ROMs, and this is sometimes what is known as a conversion. Then there is the C board, which also has additional logic chips and was also used for copy protection purposes later on. But for the sake of this discussion, we're really only interested in that B board. The major issue that Capcom had with their CPS-1 hardware was that the code and data was not encrypted in any way. If you open up a CPS-1 game ROM like Street Fighter, you can see here that the data is in plain text. I can easily modify this code right here with the hex editor, save it, and then I can load this game back into MAME with the edited ROM. And this is obviously something that we would consider simple ROM hacking with a hex editor. Now consider a hacker who is skilled with Motorola 68000 assembly and understands arcade hardware including 2D hardware and sprites. With good reverse engineering skills, it would allow them to come up with their own ROM hacks, and that's exactly what Taiwanese company Hungshi did here with the Rainbow Edition. The motivation for the Rainbow Edition was simple. Capcom tried to maintain interest in the Street Fighter II franchise by releasing the Champion Edition in 1993. But other than the minor changes we mentioned previously, it's really not that much different from the original World Warrior game. This was intentional, as Capcom originally wasn't interested in making too many changes to the game, but hardcore fans of the series were growing bored of playing essentially the exact same game, and thanks to the CPS hardware design, it would mean that Hungshi could build their own ROM hack, burn them onto EEPROM chips, and offer up the Rainbow Edition to arcade operators around the world for a fraction of the price as compared to an official Street Fighter II update. Not only this, but Street Fighter II was so popular and well known at this point that everyone wanted to see the game get updated in some more meaningful ways, and the Rainbow Edition filled that void nicely. While the game was inherently broken, its appeal and charm would stay with you. Rainbow Edition and other ROM hacks were becoming so popular that Capcom began to include warning notices in their Champion Edition official PCB kits, as well as in various leisure and arcade magazines. The success of Street Fighter II Champion Edition has sent counterfeiters scurrying to make an easy profit using Capcom's proprietary copyrighted and trademark material and manufacturing, selling or operating counterfeit versions of our game. Counterfeit in this case means any Street Fighter II Champion Edition PC boards, parts of PC boards, chips, graphics or other items containing our proprietary material that did not originate from Capcom. It would be the success of Rainbow Edition and other ROM hacks that forced Capcom to make changes to their beloved Street Fighter II franchise. According to 2014's article in Polygon magazine Street Fighter II, An Oral History, then location tester and design consultant James Goddard initially disregarded the Rainbow Edition as a broken piece of garbage, but noted that the speed of the game was addictive, and once you got a taste of the speed of Rainbow Edition, you simply couldn't go back. The real threat of Rainbow Edition is not all the fireballs in the air and the craziness, the threat is the speed is addicting, and it changes everything. Capcom in Japan were initially reluctant to speed up the game. However, according to James, after discussions, it was pitched that a 15% speed increase would be made into their next game known as Street Fighter II Turbo Hyper Fighting. In Japan, Turbo Hyper Fighting became extremely popular, and according to James, this was the end of the controversy. If not for anything else, Capcom knew all about this Rainbow Edition, and they would use the best parts of that ROM hack in their own games. Even if you look at the original Marvel vs. Capcom title, you could make the argument that some of the game mechanics, especially the mid-air attacks and speed, are all a nod to the Rainbow Edition hack. It's a good thing too, because if it wasn't for bootleggers and an easy way to hack CPS-1 games, then Capcom may have stood firm with keeping Street Fighter II as they originally had planned, slower paced with only some smaller tweaks. Incidentally, after Turbo Hyper Fighting released at the end of 1993 in the arcades, this would be the last time any Street Fighter game appeared on CPS-1 arcade hardware, with subsequent Street Fighter games all moving to the Capcom CPS-2 hardware. This used the very same Motorola 68000 processor and updated 2D hardware, but more importantly contained the infamous suicide battery. CPS-2 game data was all encrypted with a string of alphanumerics known as a key that was kept alive in a small piece of RAM that was powered by a battery. Once the battery dies or is removed, the board can't decrypt the game data and becomes a permanent paperweight. Even replacing the battery won't work if this memory is erased. This method of CPS-2 copy protection stopped bootlegging of CPS-2 games for years, well and truly past the life of these games in the arcades, and while heavy-handed, it meant that Capcom effectively stamped out illegal ROM hacks and bootlegs of their games in one move. And it's for this exact reason why we never saw a Rainbow Edition of Super Street Fighter 2 or Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, for example. In the end, Capcom themselves would never acknowledge this, but Street Fighter 2 Rainbow Edition really would influence future Street Fighter games. Some characters got new moves directly inspired from the hack itself. For example, Blanca got the vertical rolling attack, Chun-Li was given a fireball, Ken and Ryu were given hurricane kicks in the air, Dalsum could teleport, and all these moves became integral parts of each character's moveset, and it was very important. And thanks to the pirates and this Rainbow Edition, it forced Capcom to open up the game to many more players around the world, and I think ultimately it was successful. But let me know your thoughts and experiences with this Rainbow Edition. Were you someone that remembers the Rainbow Edition back in the days at your local 7-Eleven, laundromat, arcade, wherever it was? I definitely want to hear your stories in the comments below. But for now, we're going to leave it here for today's episode. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, please don't forget to leave me a thumbs up, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye for now.